Hi, this is TJR, and this weekend I saw Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange is the 14th film in the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise. And the first thing that struck me as this film began was the new opening titles for Marvel Studios. When you see these titles, it's obvious Marvel really wants to separate themselves, or I should say, Marvel Studios wants to separate themselves from Sony doing a Marvel property X-Men or 20th Century Fox doing a Marvel property like Fantastic Four. They're clearly trying to say this is from Marvel Studios. And I think that audiences are getting more and more savvy about this. I think they're starting to realize that when you saw Amazing Spider-Man 2, that was not from Marvel Studios. When you saw the recent Fantastic Four film, that was not from Marvel Studios. When you saw any of the X-Men films, that's not from Marvel Studios. And these are properties that Marvel licensed to other studios prior to forming their own movie studio. And I think audiences are getting more savvy about that, and I think that's good. Marvel has really built this brand, and they're 14 movies in, and they're showing no signs of slowing down. I've heard other critics say, when is Marvel going to make a bad one? And this film, it's becoming hard, I should say, to critique the current phase of Marvel films because the quality is just really there, and that holds true with this film as well. I think you already know how I feel about this film. The second thing I thought of as I watched this film is, now this is how you introduce the concept of magic into your cinematic universe. Yes, I'm talking to you, DC Warner, and I'm talking to you about your film Suicide Squad. That is not the way you introduce magic into your cinematic universe. You don't do it with just a few one-off comments. You use your primary mystical sorcerer wizard character in your comic book franchise to do it. DC, Warner, you should have used Dr. Fate and not the Suicide Squad, but that's a whole nother argument. There has been some criticism leveled against this series of films, and not invalid criticisms, that they are repeating the same formula over and over again, repeating a lot of the same themes. This holds especially true when you're introducing a new character. After all, we're going on the hero's journey. This film, just like with Iron Man and just like with Thor, we once again have a very arrogant character who has to learn that there is more to the world than themselves and has to go on the hero's journey. But I find that each time Marvel finds different ways to tell us this story so that it feels fresh and new again. This time, however, one thing that I will say that is different is that a lot of the Marvel films end with a violent confrontation with the antagonist, which is to be expected. These are superhero movies. In this case, we have a protagonist that tries to find a non-violent way to deal with the antagonist, and he seems to be committed to trying to use non-violent ways to defeat an antagonist. In fact, in this film, he finds a way to basically frustrate the antagonist into submission. So it's quite a bit different in that respect. One other thing that is probably a bit different from this one as opposed to, say, Thor or as opposed to, say, Iron Man, is that while we do have this arrogant character, he's not as charming as, say, Tony Stark is. When you watch Iron Man, the first film, yeah, he's a really arrogant guy, but man, is he charming. You just can't help but like the guy. Not so much with this film. The character that Benedict Cumberbatch plays, the Dr. Stephen Strange that he plays, this arrogant surgeon where the film begins, is a less likable character. So I do appreciate that difference. In a recent interview, actor Robert Downey Jr., who plays Iron Man, by the way, just in case you weren't aware of that, he was discussing the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise. And in the interview, he gave a lot of credit to the fact that, as he put it, Marvel keeps picking the right directors. And I feel this is a really understated aspect of this whole film series. Throughout, and since the very beginning, starting with Iron Man, Marvel has made choices that most studios would have not made. They've been rather daring in their choices. Um, with this film, Doctor Strange was directed by Scott Derrickson, who largely directed horror films, a lot of which I've never seen. But there was one particular horror film that I did see that he directed called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And I thought this was a tremendously powerful and human story, especially for a horror film. In fact, it was based on a true story. Um, and it was also a procedural as well. And I think that the overriding thing that keeps happening with these decisions they make on their directors is they're looking for directors who are really going to not forget about the human element, the characterizations, and the human story, so that we stay connected with these characters, especially since to a certain extent they are repeating a lot of the same themes, in these films. So I think this is once again a really understated aspect to these films. Now, Doctor Strange was originally created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko in 1963. Those original stories were very famous for Steve Ditko's wonderfully, surreal and psychedelic artwork. And of course, at the time, that artwork back then was quite groundbreaking for comic books of the time. And thankfully, the producers of this film are very much paying homage to that and very much keeping that a part of the stories. And they do a great job with the psychedelics. You might have wished that there was more of it, but like I said, this is the first film. Once again, it becomes hard to really critique these films without saying the same thing over and over again. They found the right balance of action, tone, drama, comedy, and characterization. And they just seem to keep doing this with each film. Any criticisms I have for this film are pretty minor and pretty nitpicky. The only thing I might state that I maybe wished I'd seen a little more of is the relationship between Doctor Strange and the character that is played by Rachel McAdams, Christine Brenner. I would have liked to have seen a little bit more of that, but once again, it's the first film. I'm sure we'll get maybe a little bit more of that in the next Doctor Strange film, or the next Marvel film that Doctor Strange appears in, which I'm guessing is going to be the next Thor movie. Oh, and the reason I'm guessing that is because of the teaser sequences you get after the film's over. Be sure to stay for the mid-credits teaser and also the after-credits teaser for this film. Another thing I want to recommend, which I don't often do, is that you see this movie in 3D. Generally, I'm not a fan of 3D. I feel it adds very little to the movie. The last couple of big movies I've seen in 3D, in my opinion, didn't do much of anything. That even included, Star Wars: The Force Awakens. I didn't feel the 3D added anything. But in this film, I felt the 3D was really worthwhile. It really makes excellent use of the 3D. I do also want to add that I like the fact that Dr. Stephen Strange is a music buff, and that he's a real music nerd. I do appreciate that, of course, as well. I also hope that his being a music buff isn't something that we then just forget about in the later films. I hope that they find ways to bring that up where where he displays his matchless knowledge of music trivia. Besides it just being a really fun aspect of the character, I also feel that it really helps ground the character and reminds us, the audience, of his humanity. And especially as the character progresses in later films and becomes more involved in the realm of the cosmic, I feel it's always going to be a great little thing to just use that to, once again, give us something that we can relate to about this character. If you are a fan of the Doctor Strange comics and you've seen this film, I really want to know what you thought. I walked out feeling like Marvel had made the Doctor Strange movie that any Marvel Comics fan would want to see. And I had a blast with this film. It was great fun. Marvel manages to keep finding fun and exciting ways to take us on the hero's journey. They keep finding ways to do these stories and change it up enough to keep it fresh and new and exciting. And, the franchise shows no real signs of slowing down. Would love to hear your thoughts. And so thanks so much for watching, and please subscribe to the channel.